Welcome, everyone. We're excited to have everybody here for the 2021 annual meeting. Without any more ado, Kuba, can you go on to the next slide? So welcome. So this is a come as you are meeting. So please feel free to not wear business casual, but as I'm not wearing a plaid shirt. But welcome, and don't worry about anything in the background. You're free to turn your video on and off as you see fit. And we promise that no one will make any comments, hopefully, about pets or children that happen to run by in the background. Next. So we have some goals for the meeting today. And this meeting is done every year, but our goals for this meeting in particular are to connect our members, the members of Arctic and the members of the Arctic research and education community together, mostly to provide an opportunity to talk and learn about what other people are doing. We also want to share, so to explore what individuals and organizations are doing to address key challenges and opportunities that have been identified within the Arctic region. And finally, to advance, and that's specifically to identify actionable ways in which we can work together and support each other and our scholarship in the Arctic. Next. ARCUS is an organization, a fairly mature organization, and we have a slate of board of directors. There are 11 or 13 of us, 13 board directors on the board. We're an elected body, elected from the research community. I'm the president of the board of directors, and the rest of the executive committee are Victoria Herman, Pips Veazey, and I'm gonna mess this up. The executive committee. Peter Webley, and missing one, but
Diane.
And Diane Hirschberg, right, is the treasurer. So so that is the board. There are other members of the board. Julie, actually I messed this up. Julie is on the executive committee, not Pips, but Julie Raymond Yakubian, Corey Erickson, Craig Fleener, Joe Hardesty, Timo Kovarova, Audrey Taylor, Cheryl Rosa, and Adrian Gall. Next. We at ARCUS are blessed with an amazing staff. So ARCUS is and most of what you see that's done at ARCUS is done by these people. So we have a great staff here today, and many of the staff members are actually present on the chat on the Zoom. So if you get a chance, send them a chat, let them know how that you really appreciate what it is that they do. And Helen, did you have an announcement?
I do an important staff announcement just because it is Stacy Stout's birthday today. So we are wishing Stacy a very happy birthday. You can send her a little Zoom reaction or a happy birthday in the chat. Sorry to embarrass you, Stacy.
Happy birthday, Stacy.
Thank you.
All right, and next. So ARCUS is a member organization, and we have a set of members that are that are present and have been for some of them for a long time, and we also have some new ones. I think there are 27 institutional members of ARCUS. They run the gamut from large research universities to corporate or private endeavors, and also government agencies. They are members that come from both the United States and internationally. One thing that I would like to highlight here is that we've had some member representatives provide updates on current Arctic research efforts at their institutions. And we'd like to make sure that everyone knows that these files exist as a resource, and encourage all of you to look them over to learn more and identify other points of contact within each organization. And the ARCUS staff will be sharing a link to the update files in the Zoom chat so that you can just click on that to see what we're talking about here. Next. So ARCUS at its whole, or at its center, is an organization that really envisions strong and productive connections among U.S. and international Arctic researchers, educators, indigenous knowledge holders, Arctic residents, and other stakeholders. And in order to promote exploration and understanding of the Arctic. We pride ourselves in catalyzing interdisciplinary thinking, acting, and educating, and producing collaborative partnerships. And as sort of just to put it out there, what our values are, we value shared knowledge, transparency, multi-knowledge, and cross-disciplinary collaboration, informed decision-making, engagement, and also diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Next. And there are some things that we are striving to do right now that ARCUS as an organization is striving to do. We have a set of goals, and I'm not going to go through each of the objectives within these, but I do want to highlight the overarching goals. We want to facilitate and support Arctic research collaboration. We also want to enhance the effectiveness of Arctic research communication. And next. To educate Case through 16 students and formal and informal educators about the Arctic, and to engage them in Arctic research. And then finally, to secure resources to support the ARCUS mission. And Helen, are you doing the ARCUS highlights?
I most certainly am. Yeah, okay, so thanks, Dave. And I wanted to highlight just a few activities to give you a sense of how we implement the strategic goals that Dave just summarized. And our central focus is really about bringing people together. And we do this through different kinds of projects and tools and methods. I'm showing just a couple of examples here. So everything from communication tools like newsletters and mailing lists, our public webinar seminar series, the Polar Trek program, where we embed K through 12 and informal educators in field research projects, an Indigenous Scholars Program, Early Career Conference Award, and there are lots others. And actually all the projects on this slide are supported by NSF Arctic Sciences. So a big thank you to NSF for supporting these. And next slide. And I'm seeing Dave pinned, which is fine. Dave, I'm happy to see your face, but I don't know if Kuba or Britt want to pin me. Okay, so, oh, thanks. There I am with my bird fascinator. So then I wanted to mention a few examples of activities that align with the breakout themes that we'll be talking about a little bit later today. And we'll have ARCUS board members talk a bit more about these as well. But under sort of the broad theme of collaborative and transdisciplinary research, we held a virtual collaboration workshop this past April to support transdisciplinary team development. And that was a part of a series of events done in collaboration with the University of California, Irvine, and IARPC, the Interagency Arctic Research Policy Committee. We stood up ARCUS committee early this year on interdisciplinary research to help guide our thinking and actions around this area. And these activities in particular were actually a direct result of discussions from last year's annual meeting. So these gatherings do have an impact on the work that we do. Then in the realm of community and citizen science, we have programs like the Arctic in the Classroom, which partners K through 12 students, teachers, and community members. The Sea Ice for Walrus Outlook provides weekly reports that integrate weather and ice forecasts from the National Weather Service, satellite imagery and observations from Alaska Native experts in the Bering Sea region. And just last month, we had a really energizing and fun conference on this theme, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the agenda. And then for coordination and networking, that is really a part of every activity that we do. But one specific example is the Sea Ice Prediction Network, where we work with lots of partners to facilitate a community of researchers to improve sea ice forecasts. Then COVID and its many impacts and lessons I would say also crosses through all of our work in ways that we are thinking about activities going forward, like continually trying to improve how we manage virtual events and virtual community building. So hopefully that gives a little bit of flavor of what we do, and I will point everyone to the ARCUS website for more information on all our projects, and we'll have an annual report released next month that'll give a lot more details about all of our accomplishments. And next slide. So here's a quick look at what we'll be doing today, and all of this is in the agenda online that you should all have. We are in the intro session now, and next up is a brief icebreaking activity. Then we'll come back together to introduce the themes that we'll discuss in the breakout groups. We'll have an hour in those breakout groups, then a 20-minute break. Then after the break, we'll reconvene for breakout group reports. Then we'll have a few wrap-up items to share, and the main plenary session will end at about 11:45 Alaska. And then we'll have another 15 minutes at the end for informal networking. Okay, next slide. And so before we get to the icebreaker activity, here's a small way that we'd like to express our gratitude for you joining us on yet another Zoom meeting. We will randomly select 3 participants to win a $50 gift certificate to one of 3 online stores. It'll be winner's choice. And we will announce the winners at the end of the meeting. And yes, you have to be present to win to give you as a reward for staying the whole time. Okay, and I will hand it over to Britt for our icebreaker group exercises.
Fantastic. Hi, everyone. Welcome back from those breakout rooms.
So, hey, oh, go ahead, Betsy.
No, just saying that was a fun activity. Thanks for doing that.
Thank you guys all for introducing yourselves, spending a little time kind of feeling out connections that were happening there. I know that can be a little awkward, so thank you for leaning into that. We just wanted to get people starting to think about talking with one another and sharing. So that is really what is going to be happening next in the meeting. And to talk about the different themes that we have identified for discussion, I want to first introduce Pips Beasy to talk about the collaborative transdisciplinary research theme.
Thanks, Britt. And welcome, everybody. It's so nice to see such a great and varied and productive group here. So thank you for joining us today. Just a little bit about theme 1. And I think collaborative and transdisciplinary research is such a common theme among the work that we're doing, and hopefully everybody feels a way to connect to this theme. Many times we talk about this metaphor using fruit that I've heard a number of times. An individual piece of fruit, in fact, might be seen as unidisciplinary, so a single discipline, and thinking about this spectrum from a single discipline up to transdisciplinary, or even this idea of convergence that NSF has set forward. So becoming more interdisciplinary as the metaphor progresses from a fruit bowl to a fruit salad and a fruit smoothie. And then this new idea of the fruity elixir, taking the metaphor kind of to the very end and thinking about it in terms of convergence research. That might be seen as that fruit smoothie that we've been talking about over the last several years, being transdisciplinary research, and then adding that additional element of addressing complex societal problems. So that's kind of what we mean by collaborative and transdisciplinary research. ARCUS has been working kind of in this theme for a number of years, and thinking about the challenges and opportunities for working across the Arctic and across disciplines and sectors and knowledge systems. We each bring our own perspective as people, as scientists, as community members, and this is a place where we come together to kind of talk about how to do that research. I just wanted to kind of follow up and thank a couple of people, Liz Weinberg and Holly Hapke particularly, for their work in getting us to kind of where we are today in terms of ARCUS. They were kind of instrumental in the work that we've been doing over the last couple of years, and bringing together people to kind of start talking about these these ideas as an ARCUS community. So kudos and a shout out to both Liz and Holly. So today we want to think about things that we're doing in research today and be able to share projects and activities that are happening right now that we're all doing, but also think about kind of what information or events or facilitation do we need in order to develop new teams or ideas? How can ARCUS be a part of that? How can ARCUS amplify the work that we're doing? And also thinking about building trust and engagement and team building. How does that happen across the Arctic? How does it happen virtually? I also wanted to just kind of mention this book. I can't actually see myself right here, but there's a book that I've been reading called Beyond Interdisciplinarity, written by a colleague named Julie Thompson-Klein. She's at Wayne State. So if you're interested in this, there we go. If you're interested in this book, you can buy it now. Super interesting. I'm about halfway through. So just a shout out to Julie Klein, who is absolutely a leader in interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research. So maybe I will stop there. Then we're going to have several breakout groups addressing this topic of collaborative and transdisciplinary research. So you're welcome to join us. Look forward to those conversations. And now I'm going to pass it over to Audrey.
Thanks, Pips. I'm Audrey Taylor. I'm at the University of Alaska Anchorage and also on the ARCUS board. And I'm also a big fan and practitioner, I guess, of citizen science. And so the theme I'm introducing is community and citizen science in the far north. And this theme stems from the knowledge that there's a growing community of Arctic researchers, communities, and even visitors to the state or to the region that are becoming more engaged in research and want to be more engaged in research. And yet there's very few resources that deal specifically with community and citizen science in the far north. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be considered, especially working with communities and working with temporary visitors and working in inclement weather that needs to be considered when you're considering either being involved with a community or citizen science project or starting one or using that as a mechanism for data collection or public engagement or whatever your project goals are. And so coming from sort of that issue, ARCUS recently held a virtual conference called the Arctic Community and Citizen Science Conference, or Community and Citizen Science in the Far North was the actual title. And it was an amazing conference. There was just tons of energy, lots of presentations from around the globe. There were approximately 124 people that attended that conference. It was the 5th through the 7th of October. And so kind of coming from that energy that was created in that conference, I think one of the things we're interested in doing moving forward is building and nurturing this community of practice that kind of emerged from that conference and hopefully will serve as a resource and a sounding board for people involved with or wanting to become involved with the topic of community and citizen science in the far north. So that'll be our second theme for today. We're going to have 2 different breakout groups for that. And so there is also a website. I don't know if somebody can stick that in the chat, the website for that conference, if people want to check that out, just to see the agenda of what was covered and maybe gain a little bit more familiarity with that topic. Okay, and I am going to pass it over now to, oh, Janet just put that in the chat, thanks. And I'm going to pass it over now to, I can't remember who's coming next.
Corey.
Corey, sorry.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Corey Sikoak Erickson, and I'm a board member on ARCUS. So the third theme that we'll be talking about today, we all know that COVID-19, the last 1.5 years, 2 years, has really uprooted our lives at home, in the workplace. Nothing has been spared as far as being impacted in the last couple of years. And this theme is focusing on how COVID-19 pandemic has impacted Arctic research and education in general. I wanted to say that we're in this group, we're hopefully focusing more on positive steps forward, learning from each other. You know, the barriers that we have faced in Arctic research, as far as, that have been compounded by COVID-19, are pretty clear. Some of the communication barriers, so we've talked a lot about the barriers in the last year and a half. I myself have made a living articulating those barriers. But in this case, we would like to share ideas that have worked with each other, because I know that Arctic research is so huge, so complicated, that none of us know what everybody else is up to. So this is a chance to talk about creative ways that you have overcome, cancellation of fieldwork, for instance. How did you or your project or institution respond to really moving on to these virtual spaces, creative ideas, other lessons learned in 2020 and 2021 regarding research and education? Some opportunities that we might want to consider for discussion are, when fieldwork was stopped in its tracks, it kind of really revealed some of maybe the weaknesses of local relationships to, just kind of pass on that manpower. When the students and others weren't able to get out into the field work and actually do the work. So that, that's an area that we might want to work on as a Arctic research as a whole, creating more logistical support opportunities for locals. Virtual events, you really got to be thoughtful and inclusive, in the way we've done virtual events. I know ARCUS has been really good at that. Focusing on achievable goals, the competitive nature of Arctic research causes us to really, promise a lot of things that, that with COVID-19 stressors might not be totally achievable. So we can be more realistic about that. Increase in sharing existing data sources. Obviously, like I said, we all know the competitive nature of Arctic research. So, sometimes it's hard to drop our guard and to really share resources and existing data, but that's something that's very crucial to be moving forward. Basically, just to wrap it up, is that this group is that we're hoping to focus on positive steps moving forward. We're all human. We need to learn from each other, but then we're all human, and we also need to encourage each other. So I think there's lots to be learned from each other in this case. So this is a chance for us to share things that did work and maybe how we dealt with some of the challenges. Thanks.
Thank you, Corey. And I think the fourth theme that we had on the list was coordination and networking needs. And Julie Raymond Jacobian was going to help introduce this theme.
Hi, everyone. I'm Julie Raymond Jacobian. I work for COARC Incorporated, which is the Alaska Native nonprofit tribal consortium for Bering Strait region, and I'm also an ARCUS board member. Thanks everybody for being here today and for coming back. We appreciate you being here and sharing your knowledge and experiences with us. This theme for Breakout is going to focus on coordination and networking needs, and again, solutions. As Corey was saying, we need to be actively working towards solutions. So some of the things we thought these breakout groups could discuss are the fact that there are just more Arctic research efforts, groups, organizations operating, not just in the Arctic, but all around the world, and focused on the Arctic. And what does that mean for us all in terms of our coordination and networking? It can be harder and harder and harder to keep track of who is doing what and where, and to coordinate between similar efforts. And that's been a real growing challenge for a lot of the groups that I work with. So again, talking about what that's been like for us and how we may be able to come to some solutions for addressing that particular challenge. Also talking about missed opportunities to share knowledge and collaborate, and potential duplication in efforts. This is also something that we're seeing quite often in the Bering Strait region, is duplication of efforts. And it's not intentional, no one's trying to do the same work twice, but it has a lot to do with whether or not we're able to coordinate and share information on a regular and easy basis. So talking about those challenges as well as what areas could benefit from greater communication and coordination. ARCUS is kind of a hub, as Helen and David had described. We're a hub for communication and coordination, but who else is as well? And how can we make sure that all those little tendrils connect to each other and leads to best research outcomes for everyone involved in Arctic research? And you can see here in the background of this slide, some information that Britt has put together for us, showing just kind of the massive proliferation of Arctic related organizations in the last few decades. And, you know, this is not everybody's on here. there's a lot more formal and informal groups that exist that deal with the Arctic, and they all have their own events and goals and visions and priorities. And how do we make sure that we are all kind of in the know about what's happening so that, again, we can have best outcomes for everyone involved in Arctic research, be the most effective groups and individuals that we can be, and really move towards a common vision for the future. So Theme 4 is going to talk about all those things and more that you're interested in. And sorry, I was just looking at the chat there. It would actually be great to, I think, to see this chart expanded into like all the tiny little things that actually do exist, and mapping that all out, just to kind of see the overwhelming amount of effort that is happening regarding the Arctic. So we can talk about that more in our small groups if this theme is of interest to you. And yeah, those are going to be our 4 themes that we're going to use in our breakout sessions.
To do this, our group was made up of David Cairns, Pips Vasey, Igor Apple, Howard Epstein, Osa Rennerman, Amy Hendricks, Brian Vassell, Laura Menzak, Vera Kuklin, and Vladimir Alexiev. And so anybody, if you have any other comments that I don't hit on, please pipe up at the end. So we also spent a lot of time talking about challenges, and towards the end got to areas where ARCUS or other organizations might be able to make an impact. But we did have a really nice consideration of a number of the challenges. And I think that they fall into 3 categories. So the first is making connections across disciplines. So things like developing common terms. Scientists speak really different languages, even when they all speak the same native language. Their languages tend to inhibit true collaboration. Use of acronyms and jargon really interfere with our ability to cut across those disciplines. The other thing is making an attempt to eliminate silos in universities and funding institutions, particularly, and I think this was just mentioned, between the physical and the social sciences. Even within institutions, it's hard to break down those silos, let alone across institutions. And then we didn't even challenge the idea of trying to do that internationally. So I think that that's an important point. In the second area, it was finding ways to encourage co-production of knowledge. And here we were talking about understanding that there are different knowledge systems and appreciating those knowledge systems and learning from those knowledge systems in order to encourage discipline across scales, all the way from local level to remote sensing, and being able to appreciate that you have different ways of approaching your understanding of the systems that you're studying. And then also encouraging the funders to think about longer funding cycles, that building relationships can take decades and really can't be done effectively or completely in the relatively short funding cycles that we work with. And then the final major area that we talked about was encouraging the prioritization of interdisciplinary research in universities and from funders, thinking that that your reward system is set up in universities to have breakthroughs within your field, and not spending time working with colleagues from other fields in that interdisciplinary space. And these are all areas where we think ARCUS could build communities of practice, teams, and bring in minoritized researchers, particularly reaching out to minoritized researchers and bringing them into those teams in a meaningful way. Did I miss anything from anybody else on my team?
Hi, Sarah. No, you didn't miss anything, but I just wanted to shout out that you summarized our group discussion that came with a lot of passion very eloquently. So thank you for doing that.
Thanks, Amy.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. I think we'll move on to the next group. Group 1C with Adrian and Lisa.
Thanks. I think we had a lot of overlap with the two groups that have already been mentioned, things that have already been mentioned. Sorry, my little notes got hidden away somewhere. Back up there. There we go. So, communication capacity. Those are kind of two of the biggest challenges and advantages to transdisciplinary research. Things that you've got to get right, things that you've really got to work on, things that are incumbent on us as researchers to facilitate as much as possible and really engage in proactively. A lot of the challenges have been mentioned by the previous groups. The mismatch in time scale between how long it takes to develop those trusting and open communications and relationships versus how much money you have and for how long. Another challenge that we identified was that turnover of key individuals. You do invest a lot of time into trying to establish these relationships, and then there's turnover in positions and you start over again. So that can be a challenge. And also picking amongst the many opportunities and options that you have for collaboration. How do you choose? And how do you help other people choose? If they're not steeped in the network, if they're coming in as a new node, how can we help guide folks towards the opportunities and options that will be most fruitful for them? So in looking at those communication options, we also came up with the researchers can't even talk to each other. How are they going to talk to other people if you're all trained in Western science and you're speaking different jargon? So one recommendation was maybe we need a TED Talk on somebody who's a really good communicator and very well versed in statistics and other things that are kind of common linkages in Western science to help us figure out how to talk to one another just within the Western science paradigm. And really just there is no substitute for investing time and personal energy into face-to-face communications. And I think we're all just very grateful that that is coming back around as an option post-COVID. And as far as building capacity with communities, there's options for providing short-term training, longer-term support in terms of scholarships, paying people for their time, that just drawing people in and honoring the fact that folks coming in from rural communities are sacrificing their time for this and honoring it with money to facilitate it. And then just walk into these collaborations expecting to do more than you might if you're working with other Western trained scientists. Just expect to do a little bit more to help build that capacity than you might otherwise. And then the final idea that we had was, what about a dedicated session that happens on an annual basis where folks from traditional knowledge systems interact with folks from Western science systems in the Arctic? Could that be a special session at the Alaska Forum on the Environment or one of those big national events where we really make an effort to create these connections? So that's what I had from my notes. Does anyone else from our group want to add anything?
Nice job, Adrian.
Well, I think for the sake of time, I think we'll keep going. Thank you, all the people from the collaborative and transdisciplinary research groups. So next up, we have the community and citizen science in the far north, group 2A, Audrey and Judy's group.
All right, so Lauren Culler here reporting out. So we had a really excellent discussion about this topic and started talking about, of course, the challenges of getting started with community and citizen science in the far north, and a lot of important sort of recognition of just how hard it is due to a number of challenges, including how much interest there is in involving communities in science and research, and that communities are overwhelmed and have many other things to do and may already be involved with quite a few projects. And so we kind of identified that, and then we're pretty quickly able to move on and think about some solutions and what we can do in the future. We also, I think, towards the end made an important point that by even sort of wanting to engage in this kind of community research, it sort of is an inclusive model for working in the arts. So that was kind of a common theme throughout everything that we talked about. We made an important point about the need to be really flexible. And so as a researcher going into a community, you may have ideas about what you want to accomplish, but that really an important thing to do is once you're there trying to accomplish what you want to accomplish, to also just listen and keep your project and the outcomes of your project flexible. So that way there can be that opportunity for community input. And then, you know, in designing projects, ideally it's designed so that community members are going to be a co-investigator, a co-presenter, and a co-author. It doesn't have to be that everybody in the group has to have some baseline like education level, a master's or a PhD, that everybody can take a leadership role in a good community science project. And then the third point to make, I think this sort of echoes some of what the first group talked about, was just a forum for a way for community members and researchers to talk. And there was a great suggestion, this could be something like a community Facebook page. I know at least in Greenland where I work, Facebook is a really important way of connecting with one another. And so that could be a place where community members and researchers could post ideas, their interests and collaborations, what questions they're struggling with, just to kind of help people connect in sort of this virtual meeting ground. So thanks again to my group members, and if I missed anything, feel free to chime in.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. Some really great points in there. Next, we'll move on to group 2B with Janet and Catherine.
And I believe Natasha is going to report for us if she's still on.
Yes, I'm right here.
Okay, great.
Hi, so I'm Natasha. I work for the Arctic Data Center. So we mainly focused on, let me change the view so I can see all these faces. We mainly focused on the biggest challenge in community and citizen science in the far north, like the other group did as well. And there's no simple answer to this question. And a lot of the key themes that we talked about was that we need to change the way that researchers approach communities and researcher and community relationships, taking into consideration the colonial history of the region, as well as valuing Indigenous knowledge and values. And two key themes that kept recirculating through our conversation was relationships and storytelling. So with relationships, it was emphasizing rebuilding relationships with Arctic residents and Indigenous peoples. And with stories, a really good quote from Jack Herbert was, "Stories are libraries." So Indigenous knowledge and values and how to integrate that into research, especially from the beginning of research, which means that research really needs to be bottom up and research needs to be led by communities, which will really integrate their research needs and research methodologies. If anybody else from our group has anything to say, those are the notes that I have.
Great. Thank you, Natasha. That was great. For the next two groups, navigating post-COVID Arctic research and education, we combine the two together. So I think we have Christy here to talk about what we discussed.
Christy, you're muted.
Oh.
Yeah. It's got to happen in every Zoom meeting. So
sorry about that. Specifically, we discussed navigating post-COVID Arctic research and education. The biggest challenge that we found in this area is uncertainty. What opportunities are presented in a post-COVID new normal world? What might this group or the broader ARCUS community do together to respond to these types of challenges? We found Alaska is good at noting COVID precautions and restrictions. Sasha, who was in Greenland, said we weren't over the hump yet. Alaska is better than international. Rules kept changing regarding travel, help researchers in the Arctic. A lot of research is in Russia and is struggling to overcome COVID. In general, doing mostly domestic research, heavily impacted because meetings, virtual meetings versus in-person aren't the same caliber. Managing programs challenging in terms of work other than administrative. Vaccination should be able to have everyone vaccinated, but societal differences make numbers lower than they could be. Borders aren't closed, but travel is still difficult. Water and sewer departments delayed and things like cleaning water tanks. The hardest part is the inability to plan ahead. A lot of it is building empathy, skills that are hard to do without getting out of those places. They brought people in to talk to students as a couple of field trips. Places like Toolik have 2-week quarantines, and it's very difficult to quarantine students for 2 weeks. Have to place for every scenario and its timely implementation, with push to include local villages, involve them in projects, but a huge component of Arctic projects is getting students out there in the field and is a huge component of learning. So you can't really switch out all the work to villages because students need hands-on training. When field work was taken out of the equation due to COVID, there's a balancing act to providing experience for students versus engaging local people. With scientists and universities, there's more caution sending people into the field during COVID versus corporations may not have the same protocols. For example, water and sewer, people coming in to clean versus sending students out to research and having different goals. It's much easier for some to join a virtual meeting, but not all. Regarding expensive, low-speed internet, some of those may be barriers. Some agencies like NSF can pay stipends to participants to join conferences. Virtual meetings tend to be harder to build the relationship than in person. Maybe find a balance between virtual and in-person or hybrid meetings. Not a good way to do hybrid conferences well. How can we make conferences more personal? Find a rhythm regarding in-person and virtual meetings. What actionable things can we do to address some of these challenges and keep ourselves honest that we care making progress? Possibly internet stipends, really do some homework to hone in on the most important things for the audience. How water and sewer made an 8-hour training into a 2.5-hour virtual training. Suggestions about how to smooth out significant change regarding fieldwork might be structured to not be jarring for the local community. IT is not on scientists to change the system. It's a systematic change we might want to consider. The labor and people coming in and out of villages are vital to Arctic research. But how can we also utilize the local resources and people? We need to think on a larger scale of local labor and resources versus field work and people coming in and out. Seems like a good idea regardless of the pandemic or not. Planning contingencies was already a part of Arctic research, but COVID added more. On the education side, students are suffering effects of COVID. So important to be flexible in that education affects many aspects of their lives, not strictly education, but those personal things and spill over into school. Students are also mourning the opportunity lost that was taken from them as well. One of the biggest takeaways from COVID is we all need to give everyone a break. Recognize that we are all human. We need each other's support. We need to build each other up and take care of one another.
Great. Thank you, Christy. I think did a great job of summarizing what we talked about. So the final two groups.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
We had two groups there, so I just wanted to reemphasize a couple of things that Christy had shared, and thank you, Christy. Really good job. I wanted to share kind of an observation, kind of an underlying observation that is more food for thought to really plant a seed here, just for us to think deeper about the situation. We all know that, and this has to do more with the fieldwork aspect of Arctic research, not necessarily the education part of it as well. But you know, before COVID-19, there was this, this immense pressure to really try to engage locals more in the research, hire locally. I recognized, and I think others had too, that the huge part of the actual labor force to actually do the research is the huge influx of scientists and students in and out of the Arctic research for the field season, quote unquote. So the experiential part of Arctic research is a very crucial, huge component of what it takes to become an Arctic researcher, going into the field, learning about the environment, really experiencing it in real time, real life stuff that, Arctic residents, learn as when they're kids usually. But that's a huge part of it, is that experiential aspect of it. So that those two parts of it, the engaging locals and then utilizing the students and giving them that experience, almost worked in resistance to each other a little bit before the COVID-19, for instance. When COVID-19 happened, it really pulled the curtains back and exposed this, because when you take field work out of the equation, it's chaos. That's such a huge central part of Arctic research. So what I wanted to say was that there was a few spots on the map, Utqiagvik, Clyde River, where they did have that local capacity, and those were pretty much the only areas that were really able to continue on when there was that abrupt stop in that influx of people in and out. So I just wanted to challenge folks to think deeply about that. And I think the experiential aspect of Arctic research is very crucial to the whole process, but also to just recognize that. And when we say we want to hire locally, we want to engage locally, that we have to find a balancing act somewhere in the middle there. And that's just more of a reflection that I wanted to share for food for thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Corey. That's definitely something to think on. So I think we're going to move next to the coordination, networking, needs and solutions groups. So for 1A, I think we have Peter to talk.
Great. Thank you, Sasha. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I'm seeing my video. So I'm reporting on our group. We had an interesting discussion on both sides in terms of the networking aspects, and then on sort of coordination and how we can, what might be some solutions to improve coordination across the Arctic environment. So we sort of came up with I've got listed 4 areas and 4 topics. One of them was on the networking, that there is a full spectrum of capabilities if we're looking at online networking, hybrid networking, where some practices developed by those where the internet bandwidth is an impact, where you provide printed material to those calling in to an event ahead of time. So therefore, everybody has access to the same material. Everybody's reading from the same slide deck, the same information, just like if you were an in-person event, you would have printed agendas, you would have printed flyers, all of that sort of, so everybody's got content that they can work from and then be able to follow the presenter, especially if they're calling in, but being aware that to do that requires more lead time in event planning than you would traditionally have if you're having to post out printed materials to across the Alaska and across the US Arctic environment. Then the other one, so maybe what are some effective practices that groups have put together that have allowed this to happen, and how can we share that across ARCUS's network? The next one sort of comes into the spectrum of tools, the spectrum of software systems that are used to network, talking at we're on Zoom. Some people use Skype, some people use Teams, Discord, Slack. We started to think I can go down the list. But what are understanding for those facilitating these events, the spectrum of capabilities, how people might go in and use the chat function and have an aside discussions. How can that information be brought to the forefront of a discussion so those on the phone calls can be involved, and how can facilitators or leaders to be effective? And then we talked about the coordination. One example might be sort of a web portal or some form of portal of research experts or those that have backgrounds in specific areas that would be willing, whether it's volunteers or in their job position as service to the community, or if people can be supported financially to do this, to be available for those like early career researchers or others looking to build new networks, people being aware of, but ensuring we're aware of people's time, the value of their time, and then their ability to be a mentor or a connector. And then the last one was, we saw from Julie's slide, all of those different organizations that are sort of Arctic focused, and there's a lots of researchers from outside the Arctic environment geographically that do research in the Arctic. But where are they doing that research? Where is their information about reports? Where is their documentation that those groups are willing to share that can be a geospatial map? So if you're looking in a particular area, let's say the Seward Peninsula, you'd be able to look and see which groups have done research in particular areas. So we'd still want to make sure that those with low bandwidth could access that. So a list of projects and locations, but turning it into a geospatial map, it might give us an easier perspective to get a grasp of who's working in which area, which groups are based in these areas. Again, being aware of information that can be shared and being aware of knowledge that people would want to be able to be put out there versus knowledge that they'd want to make sure was secure and safe and was their own sort of intellectual property and their own knowledge. So those are the sort of 4 areas that we touched on, that both was coordination and networking. And back to you, Sasha.
Great, thanks, Peter. A lot of great points in there. Next, we'll move on to group 4B, Julie and Vanessa's group.
Thanks. Dima is our rapporteur, so I will turn it over to him.
All right, great. Well, I know it's getting late, so I'm not going to repeat every possible aspect of what was said. I think our group really resonated discussions with a lot of previous groups, and including collaborative transdisciplinary research. And of course, we discussed a lot of aspects couldn't be discussed without just thinking about COVID. But generally, I think our group really realized rapidly growing societal demand on various types of Arctic knowledge in general, both from within the region and from outside of the Arctic. And of course, that comes with a lot of challenges in both coordination and development of capabilities for better networking. And of course, well, there are quite a few improvements and developments that was shown on that PowerPoint by Julia. There is just exponential number of actors, organizations, and agencies that are involved in various types of Arctic research. And just generally, it's hard to follow, right? We all start to get lost with a lot of acronyms, who is doing what, where. And it's not just between different institutions, organizations, and research entities. It's also within large specific institutes, right? There are large universities that just have generally little opportunities for researchers to communicate across numerous disciplines. And our group agreed that COVID probably made it even harder to collaborate within and know what other units, even within the same kind of research entity, is doing. On another hand, we thought that COVID also provided some probably new opportunities that allowed easier meeting with across international boundaries, right, which usually were just maybe possible within one physical space at some large conference such as AGU, Arctic Science Social Week, and so on. And not only that allowed virtually kind of collaboration became a norm, it also brought more capabilities for education, because now students, postdocs are also able to enter the same room, right? It doesn't take $10,000 to fly everyone and put them in a hotel and so on. So it's some improvements and some positive notes, I think, coming out of pandemic as well. We discussed a lot of problems with data, right? So of course, data, not just data collection and archival, but proper metadata that allows this data to be searchable and used by various types of communities is critical. There is definitely various aspects of understanding that has to be recognized. We pulled some sources together. NASA had great examples of different application readiness levels, which allow translate complex environmental climate data to some more user-friendly, something that can be understood by a variety of stakeholders. So that has to be continued and coordinated. We discussed that, well, scientists are generally not very well trained and probably can do better to learn about best practices for engaging with tribes and indigenous communities. This is something that can be done through a series of workshops. Again, we put some of the links in the document. Well, little finding, it's always an issue, and I think it's going to be coming back in every discussion. But of course, finding is something that needed to improve a lot of issues associated with research priorities, better resolution of data, better exchange, and so on. So some of the things that we discussed in terms of improving, of course, it is long-lasting personal relationship that drive a lot of successful collaboration and research, right? And they take a lot of time to establish. So any opportunity that help to establish those personal relationships are needed. There should be some dedicated people who do coordination, because scientists do science. They trying their best to do coordination, but there should be some dedicated personnel, dedicated hubs, right, that provide this coordination on top. There are some great examples that can be learned from other Arctic nations, including Canada we discussed. More can be done in improved outreach, especially post-pandemic, when now it's easy to jump online. Yes, internet is an issue, but there are possibilities to enhance outreach in schools. Lastly, but of course not least, is there should be some funding to fund it all, right? So funding is always the issue. And when it comes to funding, a lot of us agreed that there are those hotspots of funding. So basically it means that different funding agencies fund very similar research, okay? So we thought that coordination between funding agencies, define those kind of ways to maybe increase ability, make those funds go in better ways than just one group receive agencies from 5 different funding agencies doing the same thing. It's probably not the best way of using of taxpayer dollars. We also discussed that training capacity can be increased for various type of community and citizen science, and I'm sure that resonated well with what was discussed in a second group. So on that, I think we put quite a few sources that can be useful for addressing networking. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dima. I encourage everyone to continue this discussion in the chat. We'll also have time during the informal networking at the end of the meeting if people want to continue this discussion.
Actually, Sasha, I thought we might actually look at a few of those comments that are happening in the chat now, just because people are bringing up some really good ideas. And so I thought we could maybe use some of the time that we have set aside for that informal stuff at the end to continue the discussion in plenary if people have questions or additional comments that they'd like to bring up with the whole group, since we don't have a whole lot of time where we actually have this kind of conversation going on.
Good. Yeah, go. Britt, if you wanted to kind of lead that, go ahead.
Sure. So I'm actually looking at these comments, and George, you have a huge number of good questions in here, and I was curious if there's a priority question within this conversation that's happening on the chat that you might like to raise with the whole group, if we could. encourage some
So,
additional.
so I don't know how many other feds are on the phone, but I can't speak for the government, but I can tell you, I don't like wasting money. And so if we wind up investing in the same things because we're not talking to each other, that's like ridiculous. And so we got to find out ways to make sure we're eliminating that redundancy. But the thing that I resonate most with is like, it just breaks my heart to see this disparity of just how much people are suffering, just not having access to ways of dealing with challenges of COVID-19, the isolation that's resulting from that because of differences in access to internet and communications. And I just feel like that ought to be a huge emphasis for a request from the state, from the federal government to like make this go away. And I don't know what it looks like, but it just seems like everywhere I go, we're not able to do things because people can't participate, even within the limitations of it's not in person, or it's just so expensive. You know, even if it's technically possible, it's so expensive, no one can do it, or only a few people. So I would just ask for any inputs that you would like me in my office, the Arctic Energy Office, be thinking about so I can give it careful consideration and talk more broadly within the DOE. So the Arctic Executive Steering Committee is meeting later on this year. I'm representing the DOE there. And so this is an important dialogue that I think we're having right now. And so I would love to hear your thoughts, perspectives in this context. So enough from me.
And it looks like Michael has his hand raised. Michael, do you want to jump in there with some?
I do. I just want to say that you can make an economic argument for internet access, universal. Yeah, some transition costs are going to be hard hit, but if they're folded into some sort of larger infrastructure, it's going to pay for itself in all sorts of returns. And it's not going to take, I mean, I don't, you can crunch the numbers, but I don't know if it's 5, 10 years. There's an economic reason to expand access and inclusion. And I just want to add that to the discussion.
As well as the human rights needs for internet in all of these locations. I think I heard somebody in one of these groups say that one of the best things that Western science can do for Indigenous communities was provide them connectivity through the internet. So I think that's definitely something that we should be working on as a community, of making sure that all these disparate regions have access to each other.
And it's not just the actual connectivity access, it's also an infrastructure issue. A lot of research tries to stay away from building actual infrastructure to avoid those operational costs. I think the federal government had a huge lesson in the militarization of the Arctic, where they just brought out, and when they have to clean up some of those efforts, it's very expensive. So there's a reluctancy to really invest in infrastructure. Actual infrastructure, and that's a huge issue we have in our villages, is the actual lack of office space, the actual lack of places, computer labs, that side of the infrastructure. So that's a part of it that locally we'll have to really develop as well.
So just looking at the chat, I'm seeing some stuff from you, Craig. I was curious if you might want to jump in there to share about the grant opportunities and maybe any thoughts about how the research community might support, communities in submitting those grants, because, at ARCUS, I think we think a lot about, how can we loan capacity to some of these groups around research proposals, but because it's not always easy to do that.
Yeah, thanks, Britt. I was typing as fast as I can, hoping to avoid getting on, but here I am. Yes, the NTIA grant opportunity that was made available recently, all the grants have been submitted. The demand for high quality, affordable broadband in rural America. Read that to say rural Alaska is so significant that of the $1 billion made available, tribes actually applied for $5 billion worth of funding. So the need is significant, and nearly all of Alaska has either no broadband or broadband so bad that it doesn't really qualify as being called broadband. So the objective of the grant opportunity is to get high-speed affordable broadband to rural areas. And I don't know the number of tribes in Alaska that have applied, but I know that I'm working directly with at least 72. And one project just got finished to connect Akiak to the Leo OneWeb satellite constellation. And they're still in beta testing, but they'll be flipping the switch on November 15th. And the objective is to get those communities broadband for $100 or less a month, and high speed meaning 25 down, 3 up or better, which is pretty good when you consider that it's going over satellite, and it's an affordable way to get broadband out. And really what needs to happen is more funds need to be made available to get tribes this sort of access. Now there's a push by the state of Alaska through the broadband task force and others to build more fiber. And while that's a great idea, unfortunately, there's probably 70 or 80 or more communities in Alaska where fiber just won't make it. I don't know how you get fiber to Arctic Village, Alaska without spending several $billion. So I don't want to take up all the time, but to say that there should be a major move. The grant notifications come out 29 November with grant funding being distributed on the December 15th. And there should be an awful lot of internet capability added on. You can probably take a look at the NTIA website to see if a community that you're working with or interested in is one of the recipients of grant funding. And unless there's questions, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Craig. And I know that there is a lot of good conversation going on in the chat. And I just want to say for the folks who joined us by phone today, we will be sharing notes and developing a workshop report. So there will be some additional ways to kind of see some of that discussion if you weren't able to follow the chat today. I think we only have a few minutes left of the meeting. So I'm actually going to have us go ahead and move on to Helen and just our final few closing remarks with an invitation to everyone to please consider staying involved in these conversations. If you're hearing about connections or issues in areas where you really want to continue working on certain issues, I hope you're making some good contacts or seeing people that you want to continue working with today. And really hope that we can continue to this kind of collaboration and engagement over the coming year. So with that, Helen, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, and that's really what it's about, is that we stay in touch, so that if you're interested in a topic, that we find a way to connect with you and each other, not just once a year at an open meeting. So very quickly, these great discussions and these connections, and we're learning from each other. Now what? We will do a brief report from this meeting. So we will take all the notes and summarize the main points, and we will distribute that to all the participants for your review and comment, and then circulate a final report. And similar to last year, this report won't sort of collect dust, at least at ARCUS. We'll definitely draw on it for actions and recommendations and activities we can take up this upcoming year, and hopefully in collaboration with many of you. And that it's a source for everyone to draw on. All right, next slide. And just highlighting some ways to stay involved. A plug, if you're not already, please consider becoming an ARCUS member. We have institutional, organizational memberships and individual memberships, and there's no minimum donation to be an individual member. And the one great benefit is that sort of you get our monthly report, and that's really the best way to stay abreast of like what we're doing, what our members are doing, events, opportunities coming up. And we have lots of events, opportunities, committees, ways to stay involved throughout the year. So please do check out our website for all of those goings on that you can join. And next slide. And then I just wanted to highlight a few very specific things coming up in the next couple of months. A big one is that we will have an open nomination for 3 new board members to help lead ARCUS as an organization. And that announcement will go out later this month, and it'll go out on Arctic Info and all of the communication channels. I've highlighted a few upcoming dates. I think folks have put this in chat as well. The open virtual sort of networking webinar, November 30th for community and citizen science theme. We have an ArcticNet panel on US-Canada collaborations, and then we'll be at the AGU meeting virtually. So again, we sort of invite you to participate in any or all of these activities. Okay, and got a couple more slides, but before we go, here's a link to a meeting evaluation. So please fill this out, and if some staff could also put that in the chat. We'll also email it to all participants afterwards. Tell us what you liked, what you didn't like, so we can continue to improve our events. Great, thanks, Kuba. Okay, and just a couple more slides, but now we get to the prizes, and still 70 people here after 3 hours on Zoom. That's amazing. And so I will give it over to Betsy for the honor of telling us our 3 winners, and then we'll email the winners afterwards to coordinate.
Thanks, Ellen. The 3 winners are Natasha Haycock-Chavez, Tatiana Vishnitskaya, and Paige Jones. And I have to say that what I did a random number generator and then counted down, and a couple people that might have been higher actually left. So good for you guys for staying.
Great, thanks, Betty. Congrats, winners.
Yep.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, so yeah, so this was going to be the sort of the end of the main plenary session. So we went into our informal networking. I'm sure we can probably keep the room open for any folks who want to stay on just for a few more minutes afterwards. But really, on behalf of the ARCUS staff and board, we so appreciate you joining us today and are so grateful for sharing what you know, your perspectives, and really being a part of this community. You know, if you are on this meeting, you are part of the ARCUS community. So just a big round of applause to yourselves, or a Zoom reaction. We know it's hard to connect and share virtually. So again, we just really are so grateful for you joining us. And that's all I have.
Yeah, and I think Kuba, could we create another little community coffee chat room if folks do have an interest in just kind of
that would be great.
Finishing up a few conversations, exchanging contact info. So no pressure for anybody to stay, but if you would like to, we'll do that. We can open up a breakout room for you.
Yeah, we could stop screen sharing too.
Awesome.
And you can unmute and say any final last words as well, but
or forever hold your peace.
Or not.
Fantastic. And there's a couple breakout rooms open. If anyone wants to follow up on any connections or conversations they had in this main room in a smaller space, feel free to move into those breakout rooms, make those connections. And thank you all very much for coming. We'll hang out here in a little bit.
And maybe you can make that room 1 just the open coffee chat kind of room. So for anybody.
Yeah, so since we can't gather in the hallway after the meeting in a real room with more coffee and cookies. Bad Bert hotel coffee and stale cookies.
So I've got my coffee. There we go.
Yeah, I gotta go, but I put this in the chat, but I just want to tell you, this has been inspirational. And I'm just so grateful for the community that's gathered around, how much you care, and I'm hopeful for the opportunity us to work together. I love that moniker, North to the Future. I mean, it's true. So thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, George.
First time I met George, he would be an excellent, I told him he could either be an excellent pastor or a politician. He's such a, yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Erica.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your weekend.
Thanks, Natasha.
And thank you, everybody, for these wonderful filters, hats, costumes, and embracing the absurd. You know, it makes it a little bit more interesting than just your regular Zoom meeting. So thank you for everybody who leaned into that today.
I also, it wasn't said in the 3 hours, but I want to thank the ARCUS staff for all the hard work they've done to put this event together. We thanked everybody for coming, but I, as one of the board members, would want to say thank you to the ARCUS staff. The successfulness of this event in a virtual environment for 3 hours and still having, what was it, 76 of the original 90 or so that came in at the beginning still here, and only losing a few, Betsy, from your list, I think is impressive. 3 hours later, having the 20-minute breaks was beneficial. I got my coffee and a snack. Very well organized, very well put together. Having the virtual filters, the ability to bring in our own hats and a little bit of our personality is some good practices for others to run on meetings, I think, to see that we are humans, that we are people, and we don't get the chance to sort of show ourselves. Often we're in a very sort of, yes, hello, here I am, and then hearing Craig talking about some really good topics, but also be able to see a little bit of Craig's personality as he's talking about it. It gives you a bit more of a idea of who we are as individuals, as well as the organizations we represent. So I just want to say thank you to the ARCUS staff for all the hard work in making this such a successful event.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter. Very well said.
Also, this is not something that they just do once a year. I think you guys have been pulling these types of things off on almost a weekly basis. So keep it up. It really is making a difference in the Arctic research community, bringing people together.
And that's not necessarily us doing it for an ARCUS event, but we really are supportive of you know, other groups and communities trying to get together. So, you know, you'll see us at, like, you know, well, at least me and probably Judy at the upcoming Permafrost Carbon Network meeting, if you're going to be there. You know, so we pop into all sorts of group events like that, and appreciate you guys allowing us to connect with you in those places as well. So.
And really sharing and training. So I know last year when I had to facilitate a conference, that ARCUS shared just some tips for how to make something like this work so that people really are engaged. And, you know, I think the fact that everybody came back after the system went down, I mean, that not even just staying for 3 hours, but the fact that the meeting went away and people were like, okay, I'm going to log back in because there's such value and such community. So yeah, again, just to echo really how fortunate we are to have such an amazing team of people as part of the ARCUS team.
And I just want to say that if anybody's like interested in figuring out ways to get more involved, but you're not exactly sure how to go about that, you know, everybody on the board, everybody on the staff would be really happy to have a conversation with you. And, you know, we have folks on our membership and development committee, folks like Catherine, who was here, and Jim Hemseth, who was here today, Sasha Liebman. You know, those kind of folks would be really delighted to talk to you as well. So.
And my favorite thing is like just getting, well, okay, not getting a cold call because I'm an introvert. So email me first at helen@arcus.org and just talk about like, hey, we're doing this, how can we connect? Or, hey, we think this was an interesting part of what you planned for this meeting. Can you give us some free advice about sort of how we're approaching community building? And that's, you know, that's just a really part of what we do is help people connect and share what we've learned and sort of good practices and things that haven't worked with others. So.
And if anybody has any questions about ARCUS, I mean, this is also a good time for that. So, you know, happy to field any general kind of questions that we might not have covered at the beginning of the meeting too.
I was gonna ask, since we have a group here, I was curious, I know this is kind of just out of left field, but as far as travel, I was trying to cancel my hotel reservations for New Orleans, but I'm having struggles, so I'm almost kind of stuck with it. Am I gonna show up? And I'm really careful. I'm just wondering, but more and more I hear, I haven't heard of like almost anybody going, but AGU's been very tight-lipped about who's gonna show up in person. Is it looking like most institutions are moving towards doing virtual engagement at AGU, or do you guys have any feelers for that?
That's a good question. So Corey, you know, ARCUS, we're not going. I had heard from my ARPIC. I don't think anybody at our ARPIC staff is going, but yeah, what are others doing?
I'm hearing both within at least researchers I know with the UAF. I'm not going, but others from the university are. It seems that AGU has got some online parts of its programming that are the week before the in-person aspect at New Orleans. And then AGU has its own information on their website in terms of like who would be able to get into the physical space at New Orleans, which is the one they used last time. But I know from within my institution and colleagues, there's some that are, yes, they're going, and others that are attending virtually and going to the online events. I don't know if anybody else is further connected into AGU to know more, but they have this split week where there's 1 week of sessions and town halls that are virtual, and then there's the in-person events the following week, which is that 13 through 17.
I think we have heard. I was going to say, I think we heard from some of the NSF program officers that we talked to recently that they're planning to participate virtually at this point.
Yeah, I'm actually going to DC in a week, and almost anybody I'm meeting from the federal side, we're meeting in coffee shops, not in offices. People, other than the Department of Ed, people seem to be working more remotely still.
And I know for AGU, Corey, like when I did a virtual registration, and originally they said they were going to somehow guarantee that people who attended or verify were vaccinated, and that's not the case. So they're just sort of going on, we assume if you're not, then you're going to attend virtually. So that was a bit of maybe a policy change or lack of clarity. So I think that's one reason we're not going.
I just think that we have so many lessons that we can glean from the past year and a half about COVID, and one of them is how do small and big hybrid events work, and really I think there's an opportunity for us to really look at how something like AGU works as a hybrid, and look at other conferences that are done as a hybrid, and really see, you know, what works, what doesn't work, and bring those lessons home and jot them down, because I think all of us are seeing that the future of conferences can certainly be in a hybrid format. Just how does that work, and how does it not work? So my 2 cents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, Catherine, that's a really good point. And then, you know, when is it important to meet, and when, you know, in person? And one thing we talked about in our breakout group was that the rhythm of community building needs to change. And so sort of knowing when we can get together virtually, and for what purposes that makes sense, and when it's important to see each other in person, and understand there's a long time horizon for that as well. I have won't be popular opinion about hybrid events. I think unless it's a big conference, they don't work. I think it creates the worst of both tools. I think, again, for like a big AGU conference where you're really there for more, if you're more there for listening to talks and hearing presentations and getting like lots of different interesting projects, I think that's great. I think for the community building, relationship building, it does not work. But that's just like a null hypothesis. I can't say for sure, so I need to join a few more, but I think it's I think it's very, very hard to do well if you're really looking at the networking aspect of it.
So thank you, Corey. And I think we're probably winding down. So just wanted to again say thank you all. Got great events coming up, so hope to see you again soon. I think we'll probably.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks so much, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
The hardcore
Bye.
networkers left over.
Yeah.
Thumbs up. Time to go do things.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.